A demon knocks on your door and you open the door and it's like, right? The thousandth time the same demon knocks on your door, you open the door and you say, "Oh, you again." It's just not a big deal.
What if real lasting transformation happens when we're willing to face our shadows, the messy, uncomfortable parts of ourselves we'd rather not look at? And what if the things we avoid out of fear or shame are actually the treasures that wake us up? I'm Cari Jacobs-Crovetto, executive coach and meditation teacher, and this is Finding Treasures in the Trash. Through raw, unfiltered conversations, I invite you to turn toward what you've disowned and begin integrating it back into the whole beautiful human you were meant to be. Your treasure doesn't always live in the light. Sometimes it's buried in the trash. So, grab your gloves. Let's go dumpster diving. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Finding Treasures in the Trash. I am over the moon, excited, grateful, heart exploding today to have my dear teacher and friend, Trudy Goodman, joining us. Before she says hello, I'm going to do her as much justice as I possibly can by introducing her. Trudy is Harvard educated with a graduate degree in psychotherapy. She's a mom. She's a psychotherapist. She is the founder of Insight LA, which is a meditation network, really, in Los Angeles. And she's the voice of Trudy the Barbarian on Midnight Gospel, which airs on Netflix. I will also share that she's one of the earliest teachers of mindfulness-based stress reduction. She taught with creator Jon Kabat-Zinn. And she also, I will say, has really been the backbone for my own practice and for, in many ways, the backbone of how I live my life today. She is one of my first and most influential teachers. What I love about you so very much is that you are incredibly accessible, that you're authentic, you're delightful and funny, at times hilarious, and deeply wise and loving. And it was really that who you are that allowed me to really feel safe after a life living with a lot of fear of women. And so I couldn't be more grateful to welcome you. Welcome, Trudy.
Thank you, Cari. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. It's wonderful to be here with you today. I love you too.
I am just excited to hear also you talk about what we're talking about here on Finding Treasures in the Trash, which is really this practice of reclamation in many ways. So an ongoing practice of really looking for parts of ourselves that we've disowned or experiences that we've disowned, that we've put away in the shadows or lurking in what I call the treasure box that we sometimes don't want to look at because it doesn't look like treasures. And the practice of using that, all that collateral that's living in the shadows as our greatest teacher. So I would just love to start with maybe a little personal sharing from you, one or two experiences, maybe earlier in your life, where you faced your shadow and what that has sort of shaped or yielded for you.
I'm happy to share. I do want to say one thing first, which is when we talk about treasures hidden in the trash, I do think of the series where I was Trudy the Love Barbarian. The series is Midnight Gospel, and my episode is episode number 4. And there's a lot of cartoon, trashy stuff in there, but there are nuggets of wisdom in each episode. I just am going to encourage people. Episode 4, I'm, it's my favorite. Not just because I'm in it, but because a lot of them have, what would I say? Maybe appealing more to 14-year-old humor or something like that. But to be serious, in answer to your question, I know that it's really an accurate word to use and that Jung used it. I never really use the word shadow so much because I feel like it just casts right away a shadow of negativity over whatever part of ourselves that we've exiled and don't want to deal with, that's swept under the rug. When actually, those parts that are most difficult for us to face and be with are usually parts of ourselves that need compassion. They're asking for attention. They want some love. And, it's sort of like kids acting up when what they really want is some love and attention, but then the way they're acting is so obnoxious that it makes it hard for the adults to give what they actually need to them. And it's the same with those parts of ourselves, I think. But for my own life, I was reflecting on this, knowing that we were going to be talking, Carrie, and I thought, really, one thing that was hard for me was that it was just my tendency to not trust my intuition, to override my own intuition. And I'm going to give you a few examples of it so that you'll know this was serious. This was not just, oh, she didn't listen to that little whispered voice. And no, every time I have overridden my intuition, it's been a catastrophe in some way or another, really a disaster. And I think the tendency to do that came from a part of me that really has never felt very confident. I know that sounds funny to hear now, and it's not something that is troubling me right now in my life. I am happy to tell everybody I'm 80 years old, and by the time you're 80, you are not going to be troubled by the parts of you that are giving you trouble right now. Honestly,
I love looking forward to that I just kinda won't give 2 Fs, if you know what I mean, by the time I'm 80.
will not. And also you are working on yourself. And all of you who are in therapy, who practice meditation, who do, journaling, whatever way you have of getting to know yourself better and getting to know more deeply other dimensions of your being that maybe have been neglected or you didn't even weren't even aware of. Those of you who are doing that work, and probably if you're listening to this podcast, you are, it's inevitable that you will heal those parts of yourselves. It's inevitable. And the ones that maybe hang around, they just don't, yeah, they don't bother you anymore. They don't pack the same wall up. It's like a demon knocks on your door and you open the door and it's like, right? The thousandth time the same demon knocks on your door, you open the door and you say, oh, you again. It's just not a big deal.
I love it. Wow. Something to look forward to, I'll tell you that. I'm not too far behind you really, so I will look forward to welcoming the demon with a, "Hey, you again." But you were talking really about this you were talking about intuition, and I recently wrote something down about this that we're really taught in many ways not to listen to our own intuition when we're young, right? We're told that everyone else has the expertise, everyone else has the answers, and we gotta give our own intuition away. And so you were talking about how maybe this was true for you.
Yeah, I'll give you some examples of that. Well, I'll give you an example that's not that far in the past. It's about maybe 20, yeah, it is pretty far, 25 or 30 years in the past in my previous marriage to somebody I call my husband because I feel it's more affectionate than just ex. I still love this person and I couldn't live with them, but I was married to somebody who was at that time in the throes of an addiction and was doing things that were quite scary to me. And my own intuition was giving me red alerts, really red flags. There would be certain women, and I would be like, why don't I like Nancy? Why can't I stand so and so? Why can't? And I thought, they've never done anything to me. Why? So I would have these moments and then I would think, well, I'm just being some bitchy person, or maybe I'm just being jealous. I would turn the blame on myself and not be very self compassionate. And I would talk to my husband and say, what do you think? And he would always, because I would say, Nancy's always copying me. She wears what I wear. He said, oh, imitation is a form of flattery. And he would just reassure me. And long story short, I was in a lot of denial about the fact that actually my husband was sleeping with these women. And I couldn't face it just didn't I just didn't think he would ever lie to me. and I didn't know enough at that time about addiction to understand that lying is part of it. I overrode my intuition completely, and it wasn't until I went to Al-Anon and started my own recovery and understood that addiction is a family disease, and my side of it was all of this denial, just sweeping all these signs and symptoms under the rug because I didn't want to see them, because our lives were completely tied together, teaching together, living together. So that's one example. And where I feel like that it turned into a treasure in my life is that through the 12-step program and through meditation, I actually went through a process of retraining my intuition. I thought, okay, intuition, I've overridden you so much because I was thinking, how will I ever trust my intuition again? Right? It's not going to speak to me, or I won't know how to listen. And many of you may have that question, like, how do you listen to your intuition? And how do you discern what is your intuition and what is your fear? These are really important big questions. So for me, I decided to retrain my intuition, which meant listening when I would have an impulse. And sometimes that impulse might be, oh, just I think I want to stop at that Starbucks or that Jamba Juice. Or, sometimes it would be something kind of silly, but I would just do it. Sometimes it would be a dream that I had. And instead of just forgetting about it, I would listen to it. And oh, I had a dream that the sun was setting in the ocean. Now, I was living on the East Coast. The sun doesn't set in the ocean. But I had family members who were living in California, and I thought, okay, maybe this is a sign to reach out to people, maybe even visit people where the sun does set in the ocean. So I would do things like that to retrain my intuition. And this is a story I'm actually telling in my memoir that eventually it saved my life. Literally, it saved my life because uh, I had gone to teach with a colleague. We were teaching on Marco Island, and we had flown into Fort Myers together, driven down together, and when it was time to drive back, I just had this feeling I didn't wanna go, and because I was doing this practice, I listened to that feeling, and long story short, and it was horrifying, my colleague was killed in a head-on accident on the way back to the airport, and I would have been sitting right next to him debriefing from our week together. So that's a dramatic story. I have many others that are less dramatic about intuition and listening or not listening and what happens. So then how do you hone your intuition? This is your treasure.
Well, can I ask too, because I'm really dropping into the connection that you're so beautifully sharing about what you described initially as a lack of confidence that you no longer have at 80, and that the link between confidence and intuition. And that for some of us, it's easy to say, trust my intuition because we have a certain level of kind of inborn or cultivated confidence. And for others, that confidence piece is still the piece that's sort of the hidden treasure. And I can personally really relate to that because I think I've had a lot of kind of false confidence that lived out front. And it wasn't until I could like kind of deepen into my like who I am, often through the practice that I'm teaching here, as a means of trusting myself. And so this trusting yourself and this intuition and this confidence, it's like a little trifecta. It's what I'm taking away.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And the not trusting myself, not having confidence has been very haunting for me over my life. And I've had to, as my life got bigger and bigger because of, if you do work in a field and you do reasonably good work and you hang into that field for decades, it will grow. So it's been successive challenges to that frightened part of myself, really frightened part of myself that is, she's always certain that she won't be loved as much as she needs to be, or something like that. She'll mess up, she'll and I guess another piece of it, Carrie, and this has to do with trash and treasures, I think, too, is that I really didn't discover until later in my life the cause for some of my worries and fears and lack of confidence that I have, pretty intense ADHD, and this is diagnosed from your childhood school performance. They don't everybody's harried and distracted, and so it was explained to me that they diagnose it from your school record as a child, and that helped me understand more compassionately some of why things were so stressful in an ongoing way, and I still have, of course, to deal with that. That's a lifelong thing.
That's a lifelong thing, and in the, 50s, 60s, 70s, like, when I was going to school, we that wasn't even being scanned for, you know? My husband is adult ADHD, diagnosed a couple of years ago, and there's so much really, it's trauma of trying to understand things and not understanding why you don't get it and feeling like the world kind of looking back at you saying, like, why don't you understand?"
Yes. And even my beloved husband, my current husband, who is really my favorite one of all, he's just
That's probably pretty good since he's the current one.
but even he I'll do something that makes no sense to him. It would make sense to your husband, and he'll look at me and he'll say, "Harvard?" Just like that.
Oh my goodness. Well, I have to say, my husband is probably in the top 10% of intelligence, and I'm sure that's the same for so many people, right? Who are in our age group, just to speak to our age group, where we're talking about like 45, 40 forward, who spent their lives masking and trying to fit in, and it's very understandable that and I'm almost I don't wanna say I'm happy that you know this about yourself, but in this unpacking, right, in this facing, yeah, you now get to know there was an answer all along. My brain just works differently.
Yeah, exactly, and I feel like there are treasures in it too, because my friend Chris Germer, who's a psychologist in Boston, who started the field of mindful self-compassion with Kristen Neff, I was talking to him about some challenge I was having, and he said, "You know, Trudy, when you get old, you're gonna have more energy than other people your age." Apparently, that's a thing. Another thing is creativity. Maybe your brain is scattered and has trouble landing and focusing, but once you do, you can hyper focus. You can go deep into that thing and it gets very creative. Lots of creative ideas are generated in the ADD brain. So I think with any of the neurodivergent pieces that can be happening for people, for listeners, there are always gifts embedded in them.
Yeah. I'm really dropping into that, and especially having known you for so long. We've known each other for 22, 23 years now, and this is the first time I've heard that you have ADHD and that this was kind of a root. And this is so much what we talk about, right? Like to go back and face and to unpack, well, what is behind the lack of self-confidence? What is behind the lack of self-trust? Oh, here's another piece. Here's another treasure to look at that helps us to become more authentic, which helps us to trust ourselves even more.
Absolutely, yes. And I really appreciate what you're doing, Carrie, with this podcast because it's really important for people to be honest with each other and to be vulnerable enough to tell the truth of how they got to where they are, their obstacles, and the things that have happened in a life that happened in all of our lives, because then we don't feel so alone with whatever it may be that is the challenge of the moment. And I liked it when you talked about masking, because the more we mask and hide from each other, the harder it is to feel truly connected and to feel like we belong at the table, at the human table of blessings and, all the beautiful things that life has to offer to us.
Well, and one of the things I'm teaching about, thank you for recognizing that in this work. One of the things I'm teaching a lot about in my in-person meditation class is this idea of idealism, right? And some of what we've seen in the world, cancel culture and social media, and I'm on social media as much as the next person because we sort of have to do the work we do. But what that's reflecting to us often is this idea that we can't have any trash, right? Like we can't, that nothing can be, it's almost reinforcing that we need to take those parts of ourselves that we feel are less lovable or maybe that we don't even connect with and put them away because somehow we would be imperfect. And that's a little heartbreaking for me. And I'm just like you, and I think one of the reasons I resonate so deeply with you is I want to put my entire self out there, all the ugly bits, the warts, the whole 9 yards, because we're all in this human family. This is part of being at the human table.
Yes, it really is. And once you're in a teacher role or any kind of leadership role, and oh my gosh, that's not even mentioned spiritual teacher. You know, people will expect certain things or put you on a pedestal, according to their causes and conditions of how they were raised. And it's just natural. We just project things onto people who has step into the front of the room in one way or another. And it's so interesting because I noticed this especially when I was younger in the teacher therapist role, that when my husband at the time, who had also was also a teacher and had a pretty big platform at that time, when he would self-disclose about, say, his depression or something that he didn't ever disclose about his addiction, but he would talk about his depression, which of course fueled it. He was self-medicating, and people would be so touched. Oh, he's being so honest and he's telling the truth, and it would really, enhance actually his power, I think, especially with the, people who identified as women in his audience. And when I would do it, it would get a completely different response. Not today, but this was probably, 25, 30 years ago. It would be seen as a sign of weakness. "Oh, she's not really that together, is she?" Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
There was a place where being a woman or being a man, it was received really differently. The transparency, the honesty, the self-disclosure, the willingness to be vulnerable, all the things that you are treasuring and really encouraging in your work.
Yeah, and I'm hearing that we'll just talk in gender normative for a minute because we know this is all beautifully cracked open, right? But in the masculine dominant, what I'm hearing is when that masculine dominant comes down and says, "Oh, here I am in my vulnerability." There's something really beautiful and tender and accepted about kind of the masculine dominant that's suddenly broken and suddenly vulnerable and tender. But yet when the feminine comes forward and just as vulnerably says, "Here I am with all my broken parts." It's like, "Oh, well, yeah." And there's something in that, around like somehow the feminine doesn't really get the recognition maybe that it deserves for the vulnerability that takes just as much effort to get to.
Exactly. I think that is true, and I'm very happy that for many people, not everybody, but for many people, the sort of static gender categorizations that have been in place are loosening up and people have more freedom to really say, "Do I fit in? And if I don't fit into those 2, where do I fit in? And, oh, there's these other places and spaces where I can fit in and where I can find myself, actually, my true self." Very happy about that. But in the meantime, there's no question that the feminine has been less valued and that things that would be seen as a sign of courage in the masculine can be seen as a sign of, oh, yeah, too emotional, to this, to that.
Yeah, weaker. I do want to talk about the spiritual side of this because, of course, you've really dedicated your life to your students like me in teaching, you know, really Buddhist and secular meditation, which I followed in your footsteps. I teach exactly the same way. And I know you've reviewed like my 5 steps of inner truth work and you're very busy. I don't expect you to know the whole thing, so don't worry about that. But you get the gist. And I would love to hear you talk about, there's this conversation sometimes, right, among Buddhists around like no self, dropping the self, and then juxtaposed against working on the self, right? And oh well, if I'm truly like dropping all my narratives and my conditioning and my quote unquote all the things that make me me, why do I need to keep doing work like looking for the parts of myself that are maybe need more healing? Isn't that self-work, right?
Yeah, that's a huge, important question. And I kind of rebel against what I feel is the dualism of the non dual path.
I love that.
It's a non dual path, right? But at the same time, it's completely dualistic because it's saying drop your story, drop yourself. That's all beside the point. That's not spiritual. What's spiritual is oneness. And so I feel like the self with which we are totally identified, no space between the skull and the brain, no sliver of awareness or mindfulness or the ability to reflect back on this self. That's the self that gets in our way. The self that I'm identified with when I need things to be a certain way because don't you know who I am? Or don't you, because I need this for myself to be comfortable in the world. I need the world to be different from the way it is right now. I need to not be worried about climate or nuclear war or democracy or, you know, when I get into my agendas of what I like and what I don't dislike, and I have no awareness, I mean, we all have opinions, we all have likes and dislikes, but we can hold those in a space of awareness, of compassionate, tender, more loving, accepting awareness. And from that space, we work on the self. Ram Dass once said that he considered his self and his personality kind of like having a pet. You train your pet. I'm taking it further than Ram Dass did, but you train your pet to, pee and poo outside but we do need to train ourselves to be aware. We need to train ourselves to have access to states of love and compassion and joy and equanimity and generosity and, all of these beautiful spaces where the heart can dwell. We train, but I think of it as training the mind or training the heart. I love the Sanskrit word chitta because it means both heart and mind. We're training the chitta to open to more spacious mind states, to open our hearts to each other, to all the difficult parts of ourselves, to the difficult people who surround us. They're difficult, right? Not us.
Not us, no, never.
No, no, no. And so this deep question of, well, I'm not supposed to have a self, or I mean, we have a self. And we don't have to be 100% identified with this self in the form of, Trudy or Cari or whoever you are listening. We can understand that this self of Trudy, of Cari, of who you are, listener, is also part of a larger self, a much bigger dimension of being that sometimes is called big mind, or sometimes is called Buddha mind, or sometimes it's called spirit, and sometimes it's called God, and sometimes, the true nature that we call it true nature just because we're unaware of it. It's not that it's truer than the self that gets all stuck and gets its knickers in a twist. It is all one being that we are, but we tend to think of consciousness as inside ourself instead of understanding that this self exists in a realm, a field of consciousness, that consciousness is born into this body that we each are. It's like a figure ground shift. And it doesn't require doing away with the self. It doesn't require feeling like I don't really have a self, so why should I work on anything? Because if you're trying to live your everyday life, you have a self.
Yeah, absolutely. The story that comes to mind for me is when I did 3 months of mostly silence in the Himalayas, and during that time, I had a fairly prolific teacher. Her name is Rinpoche Ziji, and she taught a very simple teaching that is pointing to what you're saying, which is there are points of view, and everything is a point of view, yourself, your emotions, even energy, and there's awakened awareness, and they need each other. They can't exist without each other. And I can remember coming back, I really was in quite a state of merging after that, and it's so easy, of course, when you're wandering through the streets of India. And then I went to Thailand and I wandered through the streets of Thailand and I could just be in this wide open, blown out, somewhat no, like I can remember things would come and I would just sort of curiously, I was very non reactive. I came back to the US and then first stayed back with my family and then my friends. And I could just feel the energy of like myself, like almost re putting itself back together again. And I thought, God, I didn't actually get rid of her and all her stuff. And in many ways, Trudy, like this work that I've been doing since I've returned is like, to me, I feel a little emotional even as this comes out of my mouth. I don't think I've said this before. It's been a gift to the people I love because me working on my stuff only it allows me to love better every time I face something that I don't like about myself.
Right, because you face it in the context of love, of caring enough for yourself that you're willing. People think of spiritual work as sublime, they think of angels and they think of just pretty, lovely things like those beautiful qualities of mind and heart that I just mentioned. They're very spiritual, right? But a lot of spiritual practice is like digging in the trenches. It's like ditch digging. It's really hard work and it's not romantic and it's not pretty. And I guess that's why more people don't do it.
Or maybe people are trying to figure it out. I always say on this podcast, like nobody gets out of here for free. Like we don't get on on the perfection train and off we go, right? Like I can remember coming back from that trip and when that sort of self started to, get in the way again, let's just say, I got really depressed. Like I really felt like, why am I here? I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in this self. I don't want to be dealing with all my own stuff and how it affects other people. And I cracked open Adyashanti's book, The End of Your World, and the first or second chapter says, waking up is not all that. Like I'm paraphrasing, of course. Like it's hard work and it's so worth it. Like if I can say that through, and I'll just speak for myself because I know me best, like through my own work, I hope my family feels more love from me to me. I hope my friends feel more love from like that, the work to find my own trash and compost it. I hope that what that's yielded is that people around me feel loved. Like, so it doesn't feel like just like self folly, like I'm just doing this so that I feel better.
But don't you feel better too?
I do feel better too.
I don't know if your listeners can see you smile, but I want you to know Cari has the most beautiful smile right now. And that is uplifting. It makes me smile. I'm sure it makes everyone around you feel just a little bit lighter. That smile comes from the work you've done. And I did look over your method of inner truth and it maps onto the practices that we teach in meditation. I encourage you to meditate because I'm talking to your listeners. I know you already teach meditation, obviously, but meditation is what hones the intuition because that part of the mind that really is the wisest part, that your wisest heart can come forward where all of our education, as necessary and interesting and important as it is to train for a profession or whatever work you learn to do, it does not address that part of us. And so we turn to meditation, psychotherapy. They map onto each other to a certain point in terms of understanding emotions, getting to acknowledge your real emotions, as opposed to the emotions you think you should be having. But then, of course, therapy is very involved with the content of what our mind is thinking and dreaming and wondering about and remembering. And meditation is more about the process of how thoughts arise and pass away and how feelings come and how we can work with them to let them be. The synergy of doing both is very powerful if you can, but I'm encouraging people to meditate and to work on themselves in whatever way they can because our world needs this right now. If we didn't have leaders who were deep down fear-based, if they had done the work that would allow them to rest easier with themselves and with life, we'd be having a very different experience in the world.
That feels like such a beautiful place to end. However, I have 2 questions to ask you. So, at 80 years old, we're kind of bearing the lead here that you've married Jack Cornfield, who you've known a good part of your life, but you fell in love later in life. You were in your 20s when you met, and now here you are. Your inside LA is growing, hanging in there. Please come and sit if you have any curiosity about meditation, or if you have a very honed practice and you're in the Los Angeles area, there's lots of places that you can sit. And there's lots of online classes. So you've done this. You're sort of, I think, when I look at you, I feel like your star just keeps rising. If there were one treasure gem that you wish that you had had earlier in your life, what would that be?
Confidence and trust in myself. And my first teacher used to say it. He was a Korean Zen master, and he used to say, believe in yourself, believe in yourself. Now, this was a Zen teacher using the word self. And he used to say, use your karma, use yourself, use the talents you were born with, use your temperament. Don't be used by it. He was asking us to be aware enough of who we were to be able to use all of who we are, as opposed to being run by our patterns without awareness. And even though I received that teaching in my 20s, it's taken a lifetime to really put them into practice to where they're part of me and I do trust and believe in myself. But if I could have done it earlier, my life would have been a lot easier and I think I would have made some better choices.
So beautiful. Believe in yourself, trust yourself, find the confidence. And sometimes that means looking in the quote unquote hardest parts, the trash. We won't call it a shadow. We'll call it, what can we call it? Like
I
the,
think it's whatever is your unwanted parts.
yeah, like there's the treasure in the unwanted. Okay. So the last question, we do something kind of fun on finding treasures in your trash called trash can cards. So we're going to go digging. I kind of spin the proverbial cards. They're almost like little tarot cards, and they have a question. And by spinning, I mean I'm going to close my eyes and point to one. Okay. And then we're going to answer that one. So, okay. Ooh, if your healing journey or your spiritual journey had a soundtrack, a song, what would that track be?
I just sang a song at the end of the meditation retreat that I finished teaching at Spirit Rock yesterday, and James Sparrows played the guitar, and we sang an old Everly Brothers song. And the song is Devoted to You. Do you know that song?
I think is that well, sing can you sing a little?
I could actually, but you have to just wait a second 'cause I have to pull up, the lyrics to make sure that I don't make a mistake. I actually made a mistake in our while we were singing to all the 100 people there, but that's fine, it was the end of a retreat, everyone was happy.
You get to be human.
But one of the interesting things about your question is that you can take pop songs that are just romantic songs about, pain in my heart, longing for you, I love you the best, all these things that the songs are about. You can take these pop songs and you can make them songs to anything you want. You can make them songs to your poor, neglected, unwanted parts of yourself that you have exiled because you don't find them acceptable in your eyes. You can make them songs to life. You can make them songs to God. You can make so okay. Here's how this song goes. Darling, you can count on me till the sun dries up the sea. Until then, I'll always be devoted to you. I'll be yours through endless time. I'll adore your charm sublime. Guess by now you know that I'm devoted to you. I'll never hurt you, I'll never lie. I'll never be untrue. I'll never give you reason to cry. I'd be unhappy if you were blue. Through the years, my love will grow. Like a river, it will flow. It can't die because I'm so devoted to you. So it goes on, but that's basically it.
That is so brought tears to my eyes thinking of singing to oneself.
And that's the thing, I wanted to pick an American song because there are some, there's the Gate of Sweet Nectar, the Krishna Docs. I mean, there's some beautiful, but I wanted to pick an American song. And this is a song, the Everly Brothers were rock stars in the 50s and the early 60s, and they did these beautiful harmonies. You can be devoted to your dharma, you can be devoted to your growth, you can be devoted to your heart, you can be devoted to your life, and devoted to the love of everything you love in this life.
Trudy, thank you so much for being here. I just love you.
Thank you for the work you're doing in the world. Mwah.
Thanks for spending time with me and for having the courage to listen inward. If you'd like to continue the journey, you can find me at bravedirections.com, and there you can sign up for my newsletter and something really exciting. If you're ready to begin exploring your own inner terrain, I've created something called 5 Days to Truth. It's a complimentary 5-day meditation journey that helps you start gently digging into your own trash and discovering what's there waiting for you. So until we meet again, be kind to yourself and trust what's emerging, because inside the muck lives the gold.
Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to a Magic Thread Media podcast.